What's up, Raptors fans? Welcome to the Warriors Report. For today's video, I will be talking about how the Raptors might accidentally make the NBA playoffs and why that may not be such a bad thing. Now, I know a lot of Raptors fans, including myself, want the Raptors to tank and get a high draft pick in this year's stacked draft, but I will get into the details of all of that and explain that. But before I do that, if you could do me a favor, give this video a thumbs up. It helps reach a larger YouTube audience when you do that. And if you could hit that subscribe button as well, it really helps this channel grow. You get a lot of Raptors content on here you won't see anywhere else. So let's get right into it, everyone. So the Raptors, as we know, have been trying really hard to tank because the teams below us are terrible and they just cannot seem to win games. Now, the Raptors were fined $25,000 by the NBA yesterday for resting some of these players. We had pretty much our every starter out yesterday, and Paul Watson decided to go off, 2 days ago, against the Orlando Magic and goes off, and we end up winning regardless of who's resting or who's not. We've seen guys step up to the plate, and I feel like the Raptors, obviously the bench has been an issue the entire season, but we always have someone step up, whether that's Malachi Flynn, Gary Trent Jr., Paul Watson, as we saw. So I do think the Raptors, unfortunately, because of this, will have to start playing their starters regardless of whether they want to or not. Now, I feel like this finds a little unfair because you see teams like OKC that are resting Al Horford because he's old. They're clearly trying to tank as well. And then you have the Nets who, Kyrie Irving's just out every single game, it seems like, because of personal reasons. But the Raptors, you know what? This is nothing new. We know we are always targeted by the NBA, by the referees. So it sucks, but I think the Raptors have to play their starters. So I do want to take a look at the standings as well here. So the Chicago Bulls and the Washington Wizards. The Washington Wizards, both of those teams won today, so they're leapfrog the Raptors, which is good because I want the Raptors to get a high draft pick. But I do also want to look at the opposite side of the Raptors potentially making the playoffs as well, and what that may do for the Raptors in the long term. So you see the Chicago Bulls and the Wizards here. They won a game, and they both of those teams actually have a game, have played one less game compared to the Raptors, so that actually helps the Raptors tanking as well. Hopefully they win both of those games. But Chicago Bulls, I feel like, have really struggled ever since they've acquired Nikola Vucevic at that trade deadline, and they got some bad news regarding Zach LaVine. He's out due to COVID protocol, so he's going to be out for some time. We don't know when he's going to be back. Now, the Bulls are going to definitely struggle. I can see them falling below the Raptors in the standing. And as I've mentioned, the Raptors have a really tough schedule coming up, but I just don't see the Raptors being as bad as some of these teams. Oklahoma City a week ago was 2 games above us in wins wise, and now they're way below us. And you know what? A lot of these teams are resting some of their players. Not Chicago Bulls, but other teams as well, and they get away with not being fined, but the Raptors do. But I do believe the Raptors will eventually make the playoffs. And you look at our schedule here. Now, the Raptors, I do want to mention, have one of the toughest schedules left. So as you see there, they also have one more game remaining against the Indiana Pacers. That's the last game of the season. Now, this schedule is really tough. As you see there, we're playing Brooklyn Nets, Los Angeles Clippers twice, and the Lakers. Now, the Lakers actually believe that game's winnable because the Lakers are still without AD and LeBron James. And that last Clippers game you see at the bottom of the screen there, I believe the Clippers are going to be resting their starters. They want to get them ready for the playoffs. So I could see the Raptors winning that game as well. Now, we have some teams we could easily beat. I can see us beating Grizzlies, Wizards, Bulls, Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, I know we lost to the Knicks a week ago or so, but I can definitely see the Raptors winning those games. And we got today's game against Oklahoma City, so I can definitely see Raptors winning some of those games. So I don't think it's entirely impossible for the Raptors to make the playoffs. Now, I do want to talk about, you know what, sometimes you do things because you're trying to, for whatever reason, trying to better the roster, trying to improve the roster. But I want to mention this as well. So the last time the Raptors tried to tank, we tried to deal Kyle Lowry to the New York Knicks, but thanks to James Dolan, that Knicks trade was vetoed. Now, it was actually really good because the Raptors were trying to tank in 2013. If you remember, we traded Rudy Gay to the Sacramento Kings. Masai Ujiri wanted to blow up this team and kind of rebuild. And unfortunately, unfortunately for James Dolan, but luckily for us, the Raptors kept Kyle Lowry, and he ended up being, one of the greatest Raptors of all time. So it seems like every time we try to do something to tank or something, nothing really goes our way. And especially with Kyle Lowry as well, you see here, I mean, these were the players, as you see on the bottom of the screen, that were rumored to be coming back to the Raptors. None of these players are in the league except for Tim Hardaway Jr. Iman Shumpert signed with the Nets and he was released after 2 games. And you know what? Sometimes everything happens for a reason. It takes some time to see it. So maybe tanking may not be the best option, even though us Raptors fans really want that, including myself. I really want the high draft pick in this year's NBA draft. But sometimes, you know what, the opposite happens, and it happens for a reason. Now you look at obviously that 2018 draft as well. I do want to mention this was the 2018 draft and the Knicks ended up taking Kevin Knox, so it's not like we really missed out on that trade. It actually benefited obviously the Raptors, but none of those players that were coming back were really going to be that great. Here again, we see the Raptors. This was actually during our championship run. The Raptors offered Kyle Lowry and Jonas Valanciunas for Mike Conley and Marc Gasol, and boy, did we ever get lucky here again, because thankfully Memphis, I believe, rejected this. Now, Mike Conley has not been the same since he's left Memphis. He's had injury issues, and he just does not look like the same player. He's aged horribly. We did end up getting Marc Gasol in a separate trade, but we're really lucky because Kyle Lowry, as we saw, was a really big part of our championship run. So a lot of sometimes, now I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say the Raptors are going to go deep in the playoffs and this is going to happen. But sometimes things happen for a reason, and you're glad it happened. And sometimes it takes a few years down the road to realize why it happened, and we're grateful it happened because you know what? Again, this season we tried to trade Kyle Lowry for the third time and Masai Ujiri did not move in. And I know a lot of Raptors fans felt some sort of way, but you know what? Sometimes some things just happen, and it's a blessing in disguise. And as I've mentioned, you got to go down the road to kind of see the long term effect of why things didn't happen, and you're actually really happy they didn't work out. So I do want to mention now Pascal Siakam. Now, I know a lot of Raptors fans are against making the playoffs, and I do want to take a look at some of the benefits of making the playoffs. Now, I think a lot of us fans really underestimate what helps the players grow, which is playoff experience. Now, Pascal Siakam, as we know, last season was horrible in the bubble and had that horrible, terrible series against the Boston Celtics. Now, this gives Pascal some time to not only improve his game, but redeem himself from that Boston Celtics series. Now, if we do get into the playoffs, realistically, we're going to be facing a really tough team, number 1 or 2 seed. So it's going to be really hard to beat them. But that kind of experience really helps guys like Pascal and OG Anunoby as well. Let's not forget he's only 23 years old and he's only had 2 years of playoff experience. He was out during our championship run. So he would definitely benefit from getting that playoff experience, as well as, you know what, Gary Trent Jr. I really want to see what he can do in the playoffs, and this gives the Raptors fans and the management to kind of assess Gary Trent's talent and see what he could potentially be. Now, obviously, in the short time he's been with the Raptors, he's really impressed me. He seems like he's got a lot of potential, and as I mentioned, he's only 22 years old. So, I mean, give him 3-4 years down the road, it's going to work wonders. And you know what? Give him this playoff experience. That does wonders for the Raptors in the future. And now I know that a lot of Raptors fans may disagree on this, but we saw what it did with Kyle Lowry. You know, Kyle Lowry really struggled in those playoffs, and he had some really bad playoffs, and he became the player who he is now thanks to those playoff experiences, thanks to those failures. So now, obviously, that's not the sexiest option of making the playoffs, but it does give our key guys some playoff experience, which is key to help them grow as players. And I really would obviously hope the Raptors tank, but you know what? We don't know what the long-term effect of the Raptors making the playoffs is. Maybe they turn it around. Maybe, you know what, this season turns around and we end up winning and make the play-in tournament or 8th or 7th seed. So we'll see what happens. Now, obviously, the Raptors need to turn it around quickly because you saw the schedule. We don't have very many games left. And in fact, the Bulls and Wizards actually have a game in hand. So if we're going to turn the season around, we need to do it ASAP. But as I've mentioned, sometimes you do things like tanking. We tried tanking in 2013 and that didn't happen. And the opposite actually happened. We've been making the playoffs since 2013. Now, this year it's as I mentioned, it's kind of ironic because the entire season, us Raptors fans and the Raptor team was trying really hard to make the playoffs. Unfortunately, just some bad luck with playing in Tampa. injuries happened, COVID happened, and the Raptors fell really below the standings. Now, I know tanking is something the Raptors fans want to do. I personally do want to do. I do see some really nice pieces, even outside of the top 5 spot. That would be ideal. But as I've mentioned, sometimes things happen the opposite way. We tried tanking back then, it didn't work. We're trying to tank now. It's unfortunately the opposite is happening now. That we're actually trying to lose games. We're winning games when we wanted to win games. We were losing games. So sometimes the opposite happens, and it's a blessing in disguise. It takes a few years down the road to realize the long-term effects of that. So I do want to hear your thoughts on what you think the Raptors should do, and what realistically you see the Raptors, whether they're making the playoffs, they're tanking, what are the best options. And let me know your comments, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below, guys. So if you're still watching this video, thank you so much for watching. Until next time.